Hello, it's Deborah from the attic, and today I have the latest Simon Says stamp card kit. This is from April 2020 and it's called Follow the Rainbows. Let me show you first this 4-cube ink pack. These are hybrid inks, which means that they're waterproof and smudge proof, and they're compatible with alcohol pens and watercolor pens. Next we have a full tub size of white embossing powder. This is my lollipop, which I am going to sneak away and hide. There are 4 watercolour paper cards for you to colour in. When I say watercolour paper, I mean that they're on a thick card that will be suitable for doing watercolours on. There are 2 envelopes, one in white and one in blue, and these have a self-seal adhesion on the inside flap. The stamp has got one central main image, and I'm going to show you several ways that we can use that image, and then it has a range of sentiments as well. The papers are from Whimsy Stamps, and they are 12 6x6 double-sided sheets of card. They have a slight covering on them, so they're not a matte paper, they're a slightly glossy paper. And they have a range of designs in really bright colours on both sides. This kit includes a stencil, and I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can use these clouds. And this stencil is called Clouds for Days. There's a $5 off coupon, and there's a code that you can use, and all the details for how to use it are on there, and those are some of the brands that you might be able to get money off on. And then finally we have the cardstock. So we have 2 white cardstock, an island blue, royal purple and dull pink. This is a particularly nice image, and I'm going to show you several ways that you can use this. To begin with, I'm going to use my StazOn black ink to ink up my stamp, and then I'm going to stamp it down onto one of the brightly coloured pieces of cardstock. The reason I'm using a StazOn ink is because I think that will work well on the glossy style of paper. I've got a black Copic marker, and I'm going to outline the whole of the character. I'm going to colour it all in with the black marker pen. I'm also going to add a border to a white piece of cardstock which I've cut to be slightly larger than my stamped image card. And I'm going to go around the outside of this with my black marker pen, and I'm going to glue the whole thing down with some tacky craft glue that was included in a previous Simon Says stamp kit. Notice that on the back of that cardstock you can see the black popping through, so when you are colouring this in, just make sure to protect whatever surface you're leaning on. Now I've got a sentiment which I'm going to add in black ink as well, and I think the whole effect of that silhouette on the card is really effective. When I get new inks, I like to try and play with them a little bit and see what they can do. So here I'm having a little test of how well these inks will colour a plain white piece of cardstock, and I'm quite impressed. And when it dries a beautiful matte. So I'm going to use this in our next card, and I'm going to create a frame similar to what we did before, but this time I'm going to use the ink pads because this is a really fun way to use them and to create a frame. I'm going to use the peachy blush colour to drag across maybe 2/3 of a piece of plain white cardstock, which I've cut down small enough so that it will fit on top of the blue frame card that we've just finished. So that's about right for where I want the colour to finish. Now I'm using my StazOn black ink again, and I'm inking up the image, and I'm going to stamp this down across that peach background. I quite like the contrast between the peach and the white at the bottom and then the blue. And then to pull everything together, I'm going to ink up and stamp a sentiment using my StazOn black ink onto that piece of experimental blue paper that I created before with the ink cube. And I'm going to add some foam pads to the reverse of this, and I'm going to put it just down on the left-hand side of my card. I've got some Nouveau raindrop style glitzy things, and I'm going to take 2 or 3 of these and I'm going to glue them down so that they follow the same direction that the raindrops and the whiz lines follow in the stamp. And that's our second card complete. For our third card, I'm going to show you another way that you can use this stamp. I'm going to just ink up and stamp down the umbrella on this piece of brightly coloured cardstock, and I've deliberately chosen this piece because it's going to tie in really well with my background. I'm going to cut out the umbrella, and I'm going to ink and stamp my image onto one of the plain pieces of pink cardstock from the kit. With my image stamped in place, I'm going to add foam pads to the reverse of my umbrella. I'm going to remove the protective paper on the top of that adhesive, and then I'm going to stick it down directly on top of where it falls on my card, where it's been stamped on my card. And the colours work really beautifully together because you've got that ombre effect from the blue into the purple onto the pink card. A little sentiment on the bottom and the card is complete. Now here's another way that we're going to use this stamp. I've taken a piece of the coloured cardstock and I'm going to make sure that the lines of the cardstock align with the lines of the whiz lines and the raindrops in the image. And I'm going to ink it up and I'm going to stamp it down onto this piece of card. Next I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut out the whole image. I'm cutting out the puddle that the character is standing in, although later on I'm going to change my mind and do something different with that. This is one of the images included in the card kit that's printed onto a nice watercolour paper, and it's got a lovely dense texture, and it's actually that I want to capture for my clouds, because I'm going to work on the reverse of the image. I'm going to take some of the blue ink on a piece of dry baby wipe, and I'm going to work on my clouds, working from the outside to the inside, just very softly. If you think you have too much ink on your piece of tissue or whatever you're using, your sponge, knock off a little bit on your paper first. I'm going to do several clouds, then I'm going to sit my image on top of it. And at this point I decided I was going to remove the puddle and trim up her shoes, but I don't want her to appear as if she's floating on the card, so I'm taking my dry baby wipe again and I'm going to add a little bit of blue to the ground so it looks as if she is anchored on the page. There are these extra little drops and whiz lines, and I'm going to add these at the same angle across my card. I'm just using plain black ink to add these. And finally, I'm using plain black ink again to add my sentiment. I'm going back to my clouds again, and this time I've got a piece of plain white cardstock, and I'm just going to draw around the inside of my cloud shapes using a pencil. I'm going to draw 3 clouds, and then I'm going to cut them all out. I've selected this brightly coloured piece of card from the kit and I'm going to cut this in half. I'm going to use the brighter of the lines, the reds and the warm yellows and oranges. And this is going to sit in the middle of a piece of white cardstock, and again I'm going to use my tacky glue from a previous kit to glue this down in place. There will be a little bit hanging out at the top, but that's okay. I'll get my scissors and I'll just snip it free. Reserve this little piece that you've cut off, don't lose it. Next I'm going to glue 2 of the clouds down at the top, and again these will overhang and I'll just snip away the remnants with my scissors. The third cloud I want to add foam pads to, because I want this to be slightly raised up from the other 2 clouds to give it a little bit more interest and dimension. And that I'm just going to glue down slightly to the right of centre. Next, the strip that we cut from the bottom that you must reserve. If you turn it upside down, you get the opposite colours. So I'm going to add a sentiment to this strip. I'm going to ink it up using clear embossing ink, and I'm going to stamp down into the centre of my reversed striped piece of paper. I hope this is clear. It should become clear when I complete this and glue it all together. And I'm going to use the white embossing powder and I'm going to heat set this. So get your heating tool to the ouch stage on your skin, and then you know it's ready to blast away and melt that embossing powder. That's the finished sentiment, all ready to stick down. I'm going to add foam pads to this as well. I'm going to remove the backing and then I'm going to stick it down on the bottom of my card. You see how nicely those stripes work out when they're reversed. I hope I've explained that properly. Now for card 6, this is another of the images, and of course you could colour this in, watercolour this, however you want to use it, and you could just use this as your card. I want to give you another way that you could use this. So I'm going to cut out the rainbow and all of the little clouds. Now at this point you could actually keep that count your rainbows on the top, and you could use that in the top right corner of a card. I'm actually going to cut all the way around the rest of the rainbow. This is how it looks when it's complete. I'm going to cut down this sentiment, which I've already stamped up and I've embossed using the white embossing powder. And I'm going to use this to cover over the little bit of text that we can still see on the rainbow. And positioning our sentiment here means that we don't have that showing. I've got glossy accents and I've got some red Nouveau drops. This is one of those use what you have type moments. I'm going to add a little bit of colour using my watercolour pencils from a previous kit to the inside of these clouds, and then I'm going to give it some dimension with the glossy accents. This will give it a nice rise, and I hope maybe you can see the dimension that it adds. It's difficult to show you under the camera. We never waste anything, so this is the remains of the cutout of the rainbow from an earlier card. I'm going to use my cutting tool to get a nice neat rectangle, and then I'm going to ink and stamp a sentiment onto the right hand side of this piece of paper. I want to make a little fishtail so that it's not just a plain rectangle, and the way I'm going to do that is by putting a little pencil mark in what I think is around about the centre of the piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to use the lines that just happen to be there, and I'm going to indicate on my piece of card where I want to start my little cut into the centre to create my fishtail. If you want to be really, really accurate, you can measure it out. This is how the whole card is going to be put together. So I have all the elements now and I can construct it. I've glued down my panel, I've cut away the excess at the top, and now I can glue down my little fishtail. The white of the card complements the white of the hearts in the background and it pulls the whole design together. I find colouring and watercolouring very restful, so I decided that's what I was going to do with card 8, and I focused on using red on the outside of the hearts and pink on the inside, and then different blues to create the rainbow. By putting this onto a pink background card, it helps the pink in the centre of the heart stand out a little bit more, although it's not terribly clear on camera. And of course you could add glossy accents to that if you wanted to as well. I'm going to say thank you very much for your time as always. Thank you for watching. I'm going to leave you with a little music and some close-ups of all of the cards that we've made today. And until we meet again, take very good care of yourselves.